Okay, so I always make, we'll try to make unique videos, and looking at things always from a different perspective, usually very helpfully so. I noticed it of the pre-release videos that various people have made about the X-H1. They've really all kind of been in the same ilk. They say, oh, well, the sensor's the same, the output's the same. Main thing they talk about over and over again is IBIS. Well, the X-H1 has IBIS. IBIS here, IBIS there, IBIS, IBIS, IBIS. I know how, and part of the reason why I'm purchasing the X-H1, this is a borrowed X-H1. Purchasing the X-H1 is for IBIS for video use, and of course, as I've tested extensively, not only with OIS lenses, but manual focus lenses, you actually have an average about 2 stops or 2 1/3 stops of a stabilization in low light shooting, high ISO shooting, which is helpful, I understand that, but I wanted to make a video, very importantly so. Many of these things, it would have gotten nothing really about this other than a slight glossing from other people's videos on the X-H1, why I'm so happily eager to get my X-H1, and of course I've pre-ordered it and will purchase the X-H1, other than, you know, completely separate from IBIS. Just say the X-H1 did not have in-body image stabilization. What is a standout, to me anyway, since this is my video review on the X-H1, which is so incredible outside the scope of IBIS. So the reasons to own the X-H1 for me, specifically, and I'm surprised nobody's really mentioned this, the spring-mounted shutter release mechanism. The actual mechanism is a 5-point attachment for the shutter mech that's attached to the X-H1. Unbelievably incredible. Now the X-T2, for example, I mean, let's just make a comparison here, which is extremely quiet relative to, say, like a Nikon flagship. Here's a Nikon D4. X-T2 is really quiet compared to that. Mechanical shutter. And of course, we do have an electronic front curtain shutter on the X-H1 as an option. The X-T2 is about as noisy by comparison as the Nikon D4 relative to the X-H1. It is so quiet. There is right at a hair above zero, non-existent. You can't feel it unless you really, really concentrate. No shock at all. It's so quiet. This would be perfect for someone shooting an orchestra or the actual wedding ceremony and shooting mechanical shutter. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. The spring-mounted shutter assembly in the X-H1 is unbelievable. And why is nobody mentioning this? It's, oh, the shutter's quiet. It's not only infinitely more quiet, it is infinitely more dampened. I mean, forgetting about image stabilization on either the lens or the sensor or both, this is itself a stabilization feature. That's just another form of in-body image stabilization, except it's not relational to the sensor, but relational to the shutter. Shutter shock, incredible. Fuji really, really pulled it off on this one. The leaf spring shutter release. I used an analogy in the past of like competition pistols get a trigger job, and in so doing you don't feel the actual trigger breaking over. The same thing with any DSLR, be it Canon, Nikon, or otherwise, or even Fujifilm, so an X-T2, X-Pro 2, you can actually feel when it's about to break over. You feel that resistance, you know it's about to break over to take the shot on the shutter release. There's a leaf spring mechanism inside the X-H1, and you'll notice this when you get the X-H1, is that you'll accidentally trip the shutter release more than a few times until you start to realize is that you can't feel it breaking over. You can't. You can't feel it. Am I in single mode? I am in single mode. I mean, you'll feel the point at which the pressure increases slightly on the tip of your finger, but there is no bump or hump. Incredible. This also, too, is a form of image stabilization. It's wonderful. Absolutely. Why is nobody mentioning this? Love it. The top display and lock, of course I'm used to this on the GFX. By the way, the top sub-display on the X-H1 is the same as on on my Fujifilm GFX. And lockable exposure compensation dial. People say, well, yeah, and I'm used to this on the GFX, which has the same display and a slightly different exposure compensation dial button. You could set it for actually hitting it and rotating the rear command dial for changing exposure comp, which requires 2 fingers, obviously so. Or you have it set to where I have it now, which is a switch. You actually press it once to turn it on, and you're using your rear command dials and exposure compensation. I actually like that feature over the actual huge exposure compensation dial. I made videos talking about the most important thing on any camera is real estate. The exposure compensation dial does not need to be there on the X-T2. It can be like this, and of course you can have it set that way on the X-T2, but we already have plenty enough dials, two main dials and two sub dials for mode and photometry on the X-H1. We don't need a top exposure compensation dial. For movie use, right now I actually have the light turned on the top display. We have this on Nikon and Canon. Necessitatively so, necessarily so. I mean, it was an intelligent choice from Fujifilm to put this on the top of the X-H1 because the camera had to be roughly 8 to 10 millimeters thicker than the X-T2 due to the IBIS mechanism in there. That added thickness to the camera gave the real estate for removing the actual exposure compensation dial to the back of the rear command dial for operation, and replacing that spot, the real estate for that, with the top LCD display, which, by the way, the bottom row is programmable independently for photography and for video, so you can actually change what it displays based upon your preferences. Very, very useful. If someone's doing video work, has the top LCD screen swiveled out, and concentrating on the actual display for video use, this LCD screen, someone always drops me a phone call at the most inappropriate time. You could use the top LCD screen for looking at how much battery life you have left, the type of settings you have for what you're shooting, Eterna or Provia, aperture priority, where things are going, number of shots remaining. So this top LCD screen, I actually prefer it and I'm used to it, being an owner of the GFX. Back button autofocus. Fujifilm, of course, listens to its customers. The large back button autofocus on the X-T2. I mean, do we have to explain what that is and why everybody's been asking for it from Fujifilm? The touch screen for autofocus point selection. I actually have a lot more eye relief on the X-H1 than I do on the X-T2, so I'm able to bring my face back, which also helps in stabilization too. When you reduce the number of contact points from your face and the back of the camera, you're also able to increase stabilization because you don't have muscles fighting with the back of the camera for in-body image stabilization vis-a-vis the sensor. The touch screen for autofocus point selection. Importantly so, in taking a shot, there is no lag if you keep your thumb in the same spot between readjusting the autofocus point selection after you've taken the shot. So the touchscreen for autofocus point selection is incredible. Something the X-T2 can get that the X-H1 does have is noticeably faster autofocus. So Fujifilm mentioned this. There is a change in the type of phase detect for low contrast and low light, improvements for autofocus acquisition and tracking. Everybody that's used the X-H1 has said it's faster than the X-T2. Since this is simply firmware based, it is extremely likely, or highly likely to be sure, that the X-T2, X-Pro 2, X-T20 very likely will also get this autofocus improvement, which is specifically firmware. So we have faster continuous autofocus. The ergonomics. Oh my god, the ergonomics. Absolutely incredible. I don't know if you want to call this a mini DSLR or a miniature GFX. The actual finger groove we actually have on the front for the middle finger. The actual ledge, which is very reminiscent of the GFX. It's obvious that the GFX was a design platform also for the X-H1 here. I mean, Fujifilm worked endlessly in development on the ergos of that. It's like, well, we miniaturize it. We can make a perfect mini DSLR or perfect hybrid. Of course, Fujifilm is calling this their flagship camera, understandably so. Perfect for video use and for photography. By the way, and I mentioned this in another video, if I had no cameras at all, or, my house was wiped off the face of the earth and I had no cameras, and I would require, a half dozen lenses or so, and one camera only to replace it with, even though I own tons of Nikon cameras, I would be purchasing actually the X-H1 camera. Just like one camera and a dozen lenses or so. Dozen lenses, right? To me, that's a small number of lenses. A dozen lenses in one single camera, the answer is the X-H1. That would be the one and only camera if I was only given the opportunity to purchase one camera. So the ergos are absolutely incredible. I love the fact that I have better eye relief off the X-H1 as opposed to the X-T2. I love the back button autofocus. I love the fact also that the joystick, what Fujifilm calls the focus lever, sticks out more. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. It's actually a lot more lightweight than I thought. Obviously this looks huge because I have the huge 80mm macro lens on there, but ergonomics are incredible. So the joystick sticks out more. Greatly expanded video capabilities. Obviously I'm not a video person, but I mean I've got 4,600 and some videos. I mean I want to do some walk around simple videos with some stabilization. So I mean a lot of people that are videographers and do a lot of editing, which to me the most miserable thing on earth is video editing. I'd rather you know, swim in a pool of razor blades and do video editing. I'm not a video person, I didn't claim to be, but I mean part of the reason I'm buying this camera is for its video capabilities. I mean, how much of a percentage of that is the case? Maybe about 30% of the reason why I'm getting the X-H1. The rest of it is for photography. As I've stated before, I don't need IBIS. I know the great usefulness of IBIS for video and for photography. Like I said, I've done a lot of testing in both OIS lenses and manual focus. You have essentially 2 1/3 stops of additional stabilization in low light, high ISO conditions, or just basically, you know, slow shutter speeds. I could, like I told you in another video, I can comfortably, with a very high hit rate, and I have better hand holding capabilities than most people do with cameras, is comfortably shoot at a 1/15 of a second with a 90-95% hit rate of sharpness, no blurry images. IBIS is not going to stop subject motion, by the way. Doesn't matter how much stabilization you actually have in your camera. Subject motion has nothing to do with how many bazillion stops of stabilization your camera has. That's not going to be stopped. That's about speed light use, however. T1 time on a speed light will always stop the motion. However, ambient light photography and slow shutter speeds does not. That's the trick of speed light and flash photography, of course, that for some reason people don't learn that. Electronic front curtain. Same thing on the GFX. So nice. That also cuts down. You should always be. Not only that, it also cuts down on shutter wear. If actually, it is the case, not only due to shutter wear, but also due to a decrease in shake to the camera under any shooting circumstances. You should really always be an electronic front curtain. This is the case for the actual first curtain and the dual curtain inside of a mechanical shutter, whether it be DSLR or mirrorless. The first curtain is not activated. It is an electronic, that's why it's called electronic front curtain, where the actual sensor is scanned and then it is followed by actual physical second curtain. So you should really always be shooting electronic front curtain. So that's a wonderful addition to the X-H1. I do love the fact they removed the exposure compensation dial. I'd much rather have this top display than the exposure compensation dial. I don't need this. I don't even use the exposure compensation dial on the X-T2, because once you set it to C on the X-T2, then you have the option of using that for adjusting +5 or -5 stops on your exposure compensation, your command dials, excuse me. I love the fact that, like I said, the top display is programmable for photo and video, for customization. There are a few other reasons, but I mean, that's a lot of reasons why. I said everybody else made a video on the X-H1. It's like, you know, IBIS. Well, that's wonderful. I'm not going to buy a camera just because it has an image stabilization, because I don't need a dancing sensor in my camera. I know its advantages, especially for video, and I know its advantages for photography, but I'm not going to buy this camera. And that's me, because this is my video review. I'm not buying the camera because it has a dancing in-body image stabilization sensor. But there is a long list that I just got done going over of why the hell I love the hell out of this camera. That's not fanboy talk. I have to pay for this. Fujifilm isn't giving me this camera. I buy my own lenses and I buy my own cameras. I'm borrowing this camera. I'm sending it back to the folks I got it from here in a couple days. Thankfully, I've had it for a week and testing the hell out of this camera. The only way I could give an accurate, intelligent review on the Fujifilm X-H1 is if I beat this camera up like a red-headed stepchild. Shot the hell out of it, read the owner's manual. I mean, you can see how many times I've dog-eared the owner's manual on the X-H1 here. I've been over it over and over and over and over again. Wonderful camera. Fujifilm is going to sell the hell out of the X-H1. Not only that, you know damn well, if you know anything about Fujifilm, that they're going to keep releasing firmware advancements on the X-H1. All sorts of little additional nifty. Isn't that neat? Isn't that wonderful? Firmware updates and upgrades to the X-H1 as they do every other Fujifilm camera. It's one of the big reasons why everybody loves the heck out of Fujifilm. I don't buy cameras based upon specifications. Fujifilm specifications, well, it's just type of Sony specifications. Well, let's not talk about Sony. A camera is not its specifications. It's about the entire ecosystem, the support, the firmware, how much the company stands behind the product, the quality of production, the amount of forethought. I mean, this camera has incredible ergos. I'm not going to mention the company, Sony, that has horrible ergos. I mean, they've had like 1 billion opportunities on the 10,000 cameras that they've released in the past 2 or 3 years. Haven't changed the ergos. It's like, yeah, we're sticking with that Ergonomics, which, where you stick a lens on the camera and it scrapes the skin off your knuckles. I mean, like, well, hell's bells. So this is my list of reasons, of the countless reasons, not including IBIS, totally irrelevant of IBIS, about why the hell I love the X-H1. Why I love it. The leaf spring on the shutter, the 5-point suspension on the shutter mech, absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. Touch autofocus, back button autofocus, incredible ergos. You can't do this with any single hand holding off the tip of your fingers. If you actually want to do something, great. I haven't had the opportunity to use the vertical grip for this yet, which obviously gives me 30 minutes of 4K video, and also 11 frames per second, but I mean, it's no different than the XT2, so I know what to expect out of the vertical grip for the X-H1, which I also have ordered, but Fujifilm nailed it out of the park, and I know you're going to probably think that's fanboy talk, but it sure the hell is not, because I don't carry any water for these companies. I have to give honest, intelligent reviews based upon experience. And of all the X-H1 videos out there, I noticed that really they're all from people that has like handled it for a few hours. I mean, I've been cranking on this camera for days and days and days. So thank you so much for watching. If you like these videos, you can click the link below, make a small donation. Namaste, bolshoy vam spasiba, as they say in Russian. Увидимся, пока, and aloha. Thank you so much for watching, and good night. Let me know if you have any questions. Fuji!